whether he can speak freely. It's about whether someone like Tucker Carlson, who is a very powerful force in the conservative movement.
You host people on your show all the time who call my husband and myself a Nazi. So how is that any different from Tucker Carlson going on Nick Fuentes having Tucker Carlson on his show? It's not different.
He's actually
anti-Semitic. He's anti-Semite.
A Hitler admirer. Nick Fuentes is actually a Hitler admirer.
But he literally is not a good human being.
That is a different thing.
Excuse me, you had Jennifer Welch on your show very often, and you've never pushed back as she has called my husband a white nationalist.
Hold on.
That is no different than Nick Fuentes going on Tucker Carlson's show. It's not, and you should admit it.
Well, hold on. Wait, hold on. How is it anything similar?
In today's video, Abby Phillip destroys Katie Miller on CNN's Newsnight with Abby Phillip. Things heat up fast as Abby Phillip calls out the MAGA hypocrisy that Katie Miller keeps trying to gloss over, especially when it comes to Donald Trump's shifting ideology and the movement's growing embrace of far-right figures like Nick Fuentes. Abby Phillip cuts through the excuses and gets to the real problem. The MAGA world wants the freedom to platform extremists without taking responsibility for the damage it causes to the Republican Party and the country. This debate gets tense because Abby Phillip refuses to let the gaslighting slide, and every time Katie Miller tries to defend the chaos, the contradictions only get louder. So let's dive in and watch how Abby Phillip shuts down Katie Miller on CNN's Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
Resolve itself very magically.
I don't think it's Marjorie Taylor Greene's fault that she thought that Trump was an isolationist.
No, actually,
I think part of the problem is that Trump's vision for politics is whatever Trump wants.
No,
and all of those other people, but Scott, there are isolationists in the MAGA tent. What happens to them? Do they just go away? Do they just go away?
Look, here's the deal. A lot of people tried to ascribe their own personal views to Trump, and they tried to, I guess, influence him into their own personal views or make their personal views stick to him. He has actually, on the issue of Iran, shown extreme moral clarity about this for decades. He has always said they cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. In his first term, he fired cruise missiles into Syria. We took out Soleimani. Trump has never been an isolationist, and anybody walking around in 2025 who thinks that he is being willfully blind or just stupid. He has been for smart engagement. He's not for adventurism, but he's been for smart engagement since he came on the national scene.
Steve Bannon said to Axios, Trump knows his movement's base better than anyone, but a lot of his base feels that he's spending too much time on Palestine and not enough on East Palestine, Ohio.
So listen, the fact is that Donald Trump doesn't have politics, and I'm tired of people ascribing a politic to Donald Trump. He has interests. And most of those interests revolve around himself. And I think people realize that Donald Trump is very transactional. And at the end of the day, the transactions that Donald Trump makes usually benefit in some way his worldview, himself, his family, his politic. That's first and foremost. And the thing that bothers me the most is that people think, for example, that MAGA, I know you mentioned Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. MAGA's like, it's Ticketmaster. It's non-transferable. If J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio think they're about to inherit the MAGA base, there's nothing about J.D. Vance. And let me put a bow on this. One more thing. Because what they don't realize is that even a part of this MAGA base, the fact that we're even mentioning Nick Fuentes, he's 4'11", he's misogynistic, and he's anti-Semitic, but yet he is somebody who has the pulse of the Republican base right now.
The clash between Abby Phillip, Bakari Sellers, and Scott Jennings instantly hits at the core tension inside today's Republican politics, the confusion, and honestly the denial about what Trumpism actually is. And this is where Abby Phillip and Bakari Sellers are on solid ground. Because if you step back from the noise, the pattern is unmistakable. Donald Trump doesn't operate from an ideology. He operates from impulse, interest, and whatever benefits him in the moment. Just look at the record. Trump has swung from calling for pulling troops out of the Middle East to then ordering major strikes like the Soleimani assassination. He mocked NATO one day and then bragged about strengthening it the next. That isn't moral clarity. That's improvisation with global consequences. And experts from both parties have pointed this out, including former national security officials who routinely describe Trump's foreign policy as chaotic, uninformed, and driven by personal grudges. And Abby Phillip is right to press Scott Jennings on what happens to the actual isolationists in the MAGA movement, because they very much exist. Just look at people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, and even Steve Bannon. They've openly pushed for pulling back US support for Ukraine and reducing America's global presence. That's not speculation, it's on record. So pretending that Trump's base is unified behind some strategic doctrine is just wishful thinking. And Bakari Sellers nails another uncomfortable truth. Trump's movement isn't a philosophy, it's a brand. J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and others can try to position themselves as the heirs to MAGA, but you can't inherit something that was built entirely around one man's personality. Even longtime Republicans admit privately that the base doesn't follow policy, it follows Trump. And honestly, the fact that figures like Nick Fuentes even get mentioned when talking about the MAGA coalition should tell you everything about the ideological drift happening on the far right. That isn't smart engagement. That's a movement losing control of its own boundaries. Abby Phillip and Bakari Sellers aren't just debating here. They're pointing out the reality everyone else keeps avoiding. Trumpism isn't a plan, it's a reaction, and pretending otherwise doesn't make it true.
They need to excise him.
That's absolutely
Nick
false.
does not have the pulse of the Republican base. It's what Democrats want to say to divide the Republican base when that isn't true. But I want to go back to something really quick.
Tucker Carlson was just bowing in front of him.
Tucker Carlson hosted him on his show. He did not bow, nor did he kneel.
But you mentioned
Nick Fuentes.
You mentioned J.D. Vance, and he also did not denounce Tucker for hosting Nick Fuentes.
I mean, what are we talking about?
So what does it say that Vance didn't feel like part of what if he wants to lead the Republican Party, part of what he has to do is to police the boundaries of what's acceptable and what's not, and not say, hey, Tucker, unacceptable. Don't do that.
It's not up to you or myself to police speech in our country.
I mean, shouldn't it be up to J.D. Vance to say this is not part of our movement?
Are you okay? Are you okay with Nick Fuentes?
Here we go. I'm a Jew. Do you want to go there? And let's say this.
Yeah, I just asked the question. Was yes or no?
Yes, I'm okay. If Nick
Fuentes
wants to be able to speak freely in our country, he has every right to do so. Do I agree with his views? Do I think that they should become mainstream in our country?
Yes or no question.
Absolutely not.
But hold on.
I really want to go back to this for 1 second.
But this isn't about whether he can speak freely. It's about whether someone like Tucker Carlson, who is a very powerful force in the conservative movement.
You host people on your show all the time who call my husband and myself a Nazi. So how is that any different from Tucker Carlson going on Nick Fuentes having Tucker Carlson on his show? It's not different.
He's actually
anti-Semitic. He's anti-Semite.
A Hitler admirer. Nick Fuentes is actually a Hitler admirer.
But he literally is not a good human being.
That is a different thing.
Excuse me, you have Jennifer Welch on your show very often, and you've never pushed back as she has called my husband a white nationalist.
Hold on.
That is no different than Nick Fuentes going on Tucker Carlson's show. It's not, and you should admit it.
Well, hold on. Wait, hold on. How is it anything similar? It's not remotely similar at all. Nick Fuentes sits around and says that he likes Hitler. How is that similar
to... What does Katie have to do with it? What does she have to do with that? She has nothing to do with it. Literally nothing.
Scott, Katie is the person who just said to me that it is comparable to say that Nick Fuentes, who is literally a neo-Nazi, is the same as somebody, a liberal, who has an opinion who is not a neo-Nazi. They are not
a hateful opinion.
The same.
How do you want? Excuse me. Let's go back to this point one more time.
But
Nick
Katie,
Fuentes can espouse an opinion on Tucker Carlson's show.
It is not the same.
And he didn't push back the same way you didn't push back when someone called someone in my family
Hold
a
on
Nazi.
a second.
It's not different.
Hold on a second.
It's not.
If someone comes on this show and says, I love Hitler and I admire what he did, they would never, first of all, I would never invite them on the show and they would never be invited back. So those two things are not the same thing.
But yet you've gone on Jennifer Welch's podcast. It's the same thing.
They are not the same thing.
This whole exchange really shows how uncomfortable some conservatives get when the conversation shifts from abstract free speech arguments to the actual consequences of platforming extremists. And Abby Phillip isn't wrong to push this point, because pretending Nick Fuentes is just some random voice on the internet ignores the very real influence he has had on parts of the far-right ecosystem. Fuentes wasn't a fringe name by accident. He was invited into rooms by people inside the conservative movement. He attended the White House during the Trump years. He had connections to key MAGA influencers. That doesn't happen unless someone wanted him close. And Bakari Sellers is right to highlight the difference between someone having a controversial political opinion and someone openly praising Adolf Hitler. That distinction matters because we're not talking about routine political disagreements. We're talking about a person who has positioned himself as an explicit neo-Nazi, who has organized events like America First conferences where attendees wore badges with Nazi references, and who has repeatedly made racist, anti-Semitic, and authoritarian statements. That's not speech conservatives don't like. That's extremist ideology that historically fuels real-world violence. The idea that Tucker Carlson hosting Nick Fuentes is somehow equivalent to a liberal commentator calling someone a white nationalist is such a false comparison. One is a factual label supported by documented statements and behavior. The other is an actual neo-Nazi receiving a media platform with millions of viewers. Even Republican officials, including the RNC itself, have publicly condemned Fuentes. J.D. Vance staying silent isn't neutrality. It's avoiding accountability because he knows the MAGA base includes people who actually admire Fuentes. And Abby Phillip makes the essential point. Leadership means drawing boundaries. If someone wants to lead a major party, you can't shrug off open bigotry and pretend it's just part of the marketplace of ideas. Free speech doesn't mean free validation, and it definitely doesn't mean giving hate an invitation to the main stage. This isn't complicated unless you're trying very hard not to see it.
What I think
okay.
is so, what I find so,
but hold on, Katie.
No,
do you believe that Jennifer Welch has a right to say something negative about your husband?
The same way Nick Fuentes has the right to say what he wants to say.
So you think that it's okay? Hold on. Do you think it is okay for Jennifer Welch? Is she allowed to say something negative about your husband?
Absolutely, and it's your job as a moderator to push back.
So that's the first thing.
It's the same way you're asking Tucker Carlson to push back against Nick Fuentes.
But hold on, Nick Fuentes.
Is it not different?
Nick Fuentes is espousing. He's not describing someone else as a Nazi. He is saying, I admire Nazis. You don't think that's a different thing?
Do you believe my husband's a Nazi? You allow someone on your show to say it.
Do you think those things are different or not?
I don't think anybody around
it's the same equitable comparison for Nick Fuentes to go on Tucker Carlson's show as you to have people to have on your show.
You are making a comparison of two things that are not in any way the same. I acknowledge and listen, when
it's
people
happened more than once, Abby.
But hold on.
At one point, it's a common occurrence.
When people say their opinions, I don't endorse them, but I also am not responsible for their opinions.
So doesn't that apply to Tucker Carlson?
That is different from a person themselves describing themselves as a hate monger.
Is Tucker Carlson responsible for Nick Fuentes' opinions?
But hold on a second. I am also not a Republican Party official or a Democrat Party official.
Neither is
and
Tucker
so I'm
Carlson.
asking you about you as a Republican and who you think is the leader of your party, right?
Right
and
now it's President Donald Trump.
And I'm asking your opinion. Your opinion, okay? If you think that J.D. Vance is that person, do you think that he should be sitting at a table and nodding along with Nick Fuentes, yes or no?
I don't believe J.D. Vance has ever sat and nodded along with Nick Fuentes.
Do you think it is okay for J.D. Vance to think it's okay for Tucker Carlson to sit and nod along with
I think it's okay for Tucker Carlson to have Nick Fuentes on the show the same way you have people on your show who espouse similar views.
Hold on, that's all I asked you. And we can just leave it at that. Because at the end of the day, that is what the Republican Party has to decide. Do they care whether or not someone who has a loud voice in their party is bringing on somebody who is encouraging neo-Nazism?
Wait,
and if you think that is
okay,
if you think that's okay,
let's go back to the murder of Charlie Kirk. Let's go back to the murder of Charlie Kirk. Should we?
So we have to leave it at that.
This moment in the debate really shows how hard it is for some conservatives to admit that platforming neo-Nazis isn't just another opinion. Abby Phillip keeps pressing a point that should honestly be basic. There's a massive difference between someone criticizing a politician and someone like Nick Fuentes openly admiring Hitler. And that's not speculation. Fuentes' own live streams, speeches, and posts have documented him praising Nazi ideology, mocking the Holocaust, and calling for a white Christian nationalist America that places him far outside the zone of regular political discourse. And Bakari Sellers is right that this is exactly where leadership matters. Historically, both parties have drawn bright red lines when extremists try to latch on. The Republican Party banned Pat Buchanan supporters from RNC events in the 90s when they veered too far into white nationalist rhetoric. John McCain famously grabbed the mic from a supporter who pushed an Islamophobic smear about Obama. That's what boundary setting looks like. A clear public rejection. Today, though, figures like J.D. Vance tiptoe around it because they want MAGA energy without MAGA baggage. And Katie Miller's argument that Tucker Carlson simply giving Fuentes a platform is equivalent to a pundit using the term white nationalist about someone is just not grounded in reality. Tucker didn't bring on a critic, he brought on an actual extremist leader whose followers have shown up at rallies, harassed journalists, and marched in events like Charlottesville. There's a reason the FBI has labeled white supremacist extremism as the #1 domestic terror threat in multiple annual assessments. So Abby Phillip is absolutely right to push the question. If the GOP wants to lead a country, not just a base, why is it so hard to say no to neo-Nazis? And the non-answer from Katie tells you everything. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.